Hello everyone and welcome to this special event which is part of our RIBA Inclusion by Design Festival. My name is Alan Jones and I am the president of the RIBA. Today is part of a programme of events we are hosting in celebration of National Inclusion Week. If you have been unable to attend or missed an event, you will be they're all going to be viewable again on our website architecture.com. As an organisation, we, the RIBA, are working hard to ensure that architecture is equally open to all, regardless of background or circumstance. Currently, it is not. We know there are discriminatory barriers preventing talented people from studying, practicing, or even appreciating architecture. And we take seriously our role in breaking down barriers and driving much needed change at pace. As part of this, we are using our platforms to share understanding of the key issues. Our Inclusion by Design Festival is providing an opportunity to learn from global experts and thought leaders on a range of topics, from race and gender equality to social mobility, disability, and LGBTQ+ inclusion. Joining me for today's event, Social Mobility and the Talent Question, are a panel of experts. CEO of the Sutton Trust, James Turner, who will be giving a keynote presentation. CEO of the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust, Sonia Watson. RIBA Executive Director for HR, Geoffrey Milton. Maryan Falcone from Brookes University, and Maryan Al-Irhayim, getting that right, who is RIBA, she's on RIBA Council, student member. So together we will discuss the vital importance of supporting social mobility in the pursuit of equitable and diverse workplaces and share tips on how to secure and develop the best talent. Thank you all for joining today. Whether you're on the panel or not, I encourage you to please join the discussion, share your thoughts and insights. We're all here today to learn from each other. Social mobility is very important to me, as I benefited, for example, from a full grant. It was free for me to go to university, and I really wonder if I didn't have that grant, whether I would have made it. My platform when I was standing for election was about opportunity for everyone. I firmly believe in that. And I was pleased back in 2018 that the RIBA Council and board agreed that I could bring social mobility as an issue to board and council for their consideration. Before that, I believe it was a blind spot in our consideration of opportunity for all. And it was late 2018 and early 2019 that board agreed and council endorsed our social mobility action plan. I have to thank staff within the RIBA and also in particular Maryan Al-Irhayim, who helped and inspired the work that was carried out in bringing all of that to board and to council. So I'm very pleased that here we are at the RIBA talking about social mobility. But I appreciate we've only got an hour, so we've got to move on. Housekeeping. To cover some housekeeping for today's event, we are recording this event so that those who can't join us live will be able to access the video and watch afterwards. We hope the technology will work for us today, but if we have any problems, we will do our best to continue. And if that becomes impossible for some reason, we will contact you all to reschedule. The event will begin with a keynote presentation from James Turner, followed by a 35-minute panel discussion with each member of the panel introducing themselves and an audience Q&A. So please submit any questions using the Q&A function on Teams, and we will do our best to get through as many questions as we can in the time available. I should point out that we have over 250 people attending the event, and so apologies. We'll not be able to get through all the questions, but we will do our best. The event is planned to finish promptly at 1 p.m. So introducing James Turner. We're delighted to welcome James to our event today. James is CEO of the Sutton Trust and has recently published an employer's guide on social mobility. I will now hand over to James to begin his presentation. James.
Great, thank you, Alan. So as Alan mentioned, I'm CEO of the Sutton Trust, which for those of you who don't know is a foundation aimed at tackling social mobility set up back in 1997. So we conduct research and we undertake policy work to keep education inequality high on the agenda. And every year we support about 5,000 young people, 16 and 17-year-olds directly. So first of all, I just want to say how great it is to see events like this focusing on social mobility and organisations like RIBA talking about and acting on social mobility concerns. Because if you go back 10 or 15 years, that term social mobility was really only used by academics and policy wonks. So it's great to see it in the spotlight so much these days, great to see so much attention on it. But I think it is worth just reminding ourselves what exactly it means, because the term social mobility has a very specific meaning in research in terms of the chances of an individual born to a poor family rising up the social ladder, rising up the income ladder in adulthood. But we at the Sutton Trust tend to think of it more broadly than that, in terms of the idea that every young person, regardless of where they were born, who their parents were, or where they've been to school, should have access to the best opportunities to fulfill their talents and aspirations. So in other words, no avenue should be closed because of someone's socioeconomic background, even if people then decide to take different paths. And we know, unfortunately, three pretty depressing things about social mobility in the UK. One is it's lower than we would like, those of us interested in inequality would like. Second, it may have declined or certainly flatlined in recent years. And three, we are at or near the bottom of the international social mobility rankings. So in other words, if you're born poor in the UK, you are more likely to stay poor as an adult than you were perhaps in previous generations, and certainly compared to many other advanced countries. Now, again, unfortunately, there's a lot of data I could draw on to illustrate this point, but one stat that always seems to strike a chord is that the people in Britain's top jobs are 5 times more likely to have attended a private school than the general population. So just 7% of people here in Britain go to fee-paying schools, but their alumni make up something like 40% of the most influential and powerful figures in society. Now, of course, going to private school isn't a perfect measure of wealth or class, of course it's not, but the statistic does point to how narrowly focused opportunities are here in the UK. And actually, I think it's a narrowness that because of COVID, because of school closures, because of the economic consequences of the pandemic, will only get worse over the next few years. So why does this matter? Well, firstly, for us, it's about fairness. The circumstances into which a young person are born should not determine their futures. It's simply wrong that some children have so little opportunity, and even with really gargantuan effort and ability, the odds are really stacked against them compared to their better off peers. But secondly, there's also a really strong economic argument. So in a competitive world, in a knowledge economy, we simply can't afford to waste talent in such a way. If we're fishing in only part of a pool, we're certainly missing out on some of the best catches. And actually, some work we did a few years ago, I think it was probably 3 or 4 years ago now, estimated that even a modest rise in social mobility could increase the nation's annual GDP by something like 2%, which is roughly £40 billion a year. Now, whether it is that amount or half or double it, I don't know, but it is clear that wasted talent has a big economic impact. So what can we do about this lack of social mobility? Well, it's complex. It's driven by many factors: the labour market, the welfare state, housing policy, health inequalities. The list goes on. But we at the Sutton Trust focus particularly on education as a key building block for social mobility. And unfortunately, we know this country's education system is highly socially segregated. So poorer children are already behind their peers when they start school, and all too often that gap widens as they get older. So as a result, lower income kids are less likely to leave school with good qualifications. They're less likely to go on to the best apprenticeships, the best universities, and therefore to enter the most competitive careers. Now that all sounds a bit like a counsel of despair. You know, what realistically can we all do in the face of these big ingrained inequalities, these big macro issues? Well, as a charity like mine, you know, as a profession, as people running businesses, I would say that we can definitely play our part, because social mobility isn't just about hard qualifications. It's also about broadening horizons and building experience, skills and aspirations. And who is better placed to give young people advice and support than those already in the profession? It's also about how you as organisations think about recruitment and promotion in an imperfect world, which we know does not allow everyone's abilities to flourish equally. Now, we can throw our hands up in the air and say there's nothing that can be done, or we can adapt how we identify and support talent. And those are decisions which, of course, are absolutely within our gift. So in terms of, you know, practical next steps, and I'm conscious I've only got 10 minutes this morning. So as a starting point, I'd really commend to you the guidance that Alan mentioned, Social Mobility in the Workplace and Employer's Guide. We published this over the summer. I think it's linked in the resources supporting this event, and certainly it's on our website, suttontrust.com, free of charge. The guide is a great way of breaking down what can seem like quite a complex and overwhelming task into actionable chunks. And if you can't do everything, you know, at least you can start somewhere. So it suggests, for example, that the measurement of social mobility in an organisation, or, you know, indeed across a profession, is an important foundation for action. That way, you'll know what to prioritise. So is the issue that not enough lower income young people are interested in the profession in the first place? Or are they not getting the right qualifications? Is it that they don't apply, or when they do apply, they are unsuccessful in the selection process? Or does the pinch point lie in progression within the workplace? So the higher echelons of the organisation or the profession look very different to the entry points. Now, each of those things is going to have a different set of solutions, and the guide contains some steps that you can take in each of these areas to start to address these obstacles. Now, so how do you attract more diverse talent in the first place so that that pipeline is broader? How do you make sure recruitment and selection is fair? How do you make sure that talent thrives in your organisation and there is no ceiling on achievement based on your background? Now, one particular issue that I'm very interested in and the guide picks up, you know, for example, is internships. Now, these are increasingly becoming the entry point to many jobs, but a staggering 70% of internships are unpaid, even though it costs at least £1,000 a month to undertake such an internship. Now, the guide is really clear and our policy position is really clear. All internships over 4 weeks should be openly advertised and paid. Otherwise, we're effectively locking out young people who cannot afford to work for free, who do not live in the big cities where most of these opportunities are, and who do not have professional contacts through friends and families. So that's one example of a very specific thing we could all do, which will really start to make a difference. So just to finish, because I'm conscious of time, for those of us working in this area, I think we're now pretty clear that the current circumstances around COVID-19, as I mentioned earlier, are very likely to make social mobility worse. You know, school closures have disproportionately impacted those from poorer backgrounds, and as the economy contracts, the haves tend to hold their advantages even closer and be less magnanimous in sharing them out. And from a corporate perspective, I can well understand why it's tempting to kick this issue into the long grass, because you're wrestling with, you know, viability, the end of the furlough scheme and other big economic issues. But now more than ever, I would say a focus on social mobility is critical, you know, and not for negative reasons. In a world of uncertainty and upheaval, embracing social mobility is a really positive thing for employers to do. Now, it's not about penalising those who have had advantages or giving an unfair leg up in life. It's about ensuring that we make the most use of the talents and aspirations of every single young person, regardless of their background. And I would say that that is the best possible foundation for a thriving post-COVID economy. So thank you very much for listening to me this afternoon, and the very best of luck in taking this forward in the architecture profession. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to very quickly move on to the panel part of the event. And our first speaker is Maria Falcone from Oxford Brookes. Maria, over to you. Your 5 minutes starts now.
Thank you, Alan. Everyone can hear me okay? I just want to say, James, I've been placed perfectly in this panel discussion right after you, because what I'm going to talk about in my 5 minutes is what the RIBA and Oxford Brookes are doing together, their research, and actually one of the programs that tries to answer all of these things. So first, just to give a little bit of background, we follow the State of the Nation report and social mobility, and we like to use the term non-traditional because there are so many groups that fit into that, and it's not always socioeconomically related. I would say the majority of the part and the indirect implications of that. But importantly, the research that we do and the work that we do is all about the positive aspect of inclusion, and it's such a grand motivator to see the difference in society when inclusion happens for the right reasons. When we think about some of the gaps that occur, and obviously we're still talking about education, there are very, very specific gaps, and I'm just going to put a little bit of detail on what James introduced. So you talked about everything from early school to the profession. So let's break that down a little bit and add a little bit of research to that, and then it brings to life what the bridge model is about. So we'll very boldly present what the bridge model is, this foundation in architecture. So there are wonderful charities like Speak for Schools who do research linking what's happening at GCSE level with what eventually happens in the profession. One particular piece of research was very inspiring for us, is that when GCSE students know what they want to do in their profession, they do so well. They are really committed. The most important part of knowing what you want to do is feeling a welcome and feeling a belief that you can achieve that profession. So our job has been to focus on a very specific bridge. Now, it's important to look at all of the weak points in the process of becoming an architect. First, GCSE to A level. Okay, so we know that unless there's exposure and self-belief and aspiration, that it's very difficult to to have the A levels to get into a full-time education. Then at part one, non-traditional groups are not specifically supported in ways that they need to. If we talk about equity and not equality, okay, because equality gives everybody the same thing, equity actually brings people to the same starting block. So that means that at part one, very specific supports need to be in place. After part one, there's a year in practice. And as you were mentioning as well, James, if you don't have the confidence, networking, you're not in the industry, it's very difficult to get a good year out. Then in the part two, same thing. The commitment to part two, believing whether you're contributing something to the industry, but believing whether you belong in the industry. Take that back now further into the profession. People progressing into the profession, we know the statistics, even of just if we look at the 7 protected characteristics under the Equality Act, we can look at each one and we can see that they're not represented at people who are in part 3 or get registered. Women, very few women are even getting registered after part 3. Okay, so let's look at very specifically, because I have maybe 2 minutes left, at the foundation course. This is an RIBA course. It's called the Foundation in Architecture. And it's a very different course from any other because it actually absorbs good practice from what we learned from nursing and midwifery, what we learned from social care, what we learned from accounting, the kinds of practices that they have in place to ensure that their equality, diversity, inclusion are happening, we've kind of adapted for the foundation. So students who complete GCSE can take the foundation with us. We help them to get 200 hours minimum salaried work in practice. They live anywhere in the world because it's a global course. The majority of our students this year, starting in January, are in the UK. And they work with a local tutor who we help select. And the course is it's quite affordable because that's very, very important. But it's our involvement in getting this moving forward. Now, I'm the director of the RIBA Studio, which in itself is a widening participation course. So students in part 1 and part 2 live and work anywhere. So James was saying, if you don't live in a major city, or if you're not connected to a university, so my time's almost up. So part 1 and part 2 students live anywhere and can work at small practices and study part-time with us. The foundation in architecture emerged because for the RIBA Studio to be a truly accessible course, then it must hit the ground and rise from there. And all of the aspects of equity are incorporated in that. Can't tell you all the details today. I would love to. Contact me through the RIBA Studio and we can share more all about that. And we're always trying to improve it and get lots of feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Very quickly moving on to our next speaker, Sonia Watson, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So let me start at the beginning with thanking both Maria and James for what they've been speaking about. What we do very simply is bring to life in practical terms and practical outcomes what everybody today is interested in and discussing. So to start at the beginning, the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust was created because a young man that many of you know wanted with all his heart to become an architect, and his life was cut short before that happened. Since then, we now have just under 400 young alumni who are all studying to become architects. We have created 156 practicing architects in this space, all of whom are working and thriving. We have 4 who have their own practices. We are about to start a new entrepreneurship program because actually those who are now coming through part 3 actually want to have their own practices as well. How do I get this done? We are a small charity, and I must give a shout, of course, to the RIBA, who we've been working with for many, many years, and who just last year, under Alan's direction, are now funding a part 2 architect to work here at the Trust and drive forward these ambitions that we have. So when we talk about what we do, we offer bursaries, mentoring relationships, interview preparation, a number of the things that we all know work in this space. Our internships are always paid, otherwise they do not happen. And we have 80+ architecture firms on our books. We have launched this year a recruitment partnership, which, lo and behold, and surprisingly or not surprisingly, given recent events, is now thriving to provide architects with young people who are fully qualified and ready to go as practicing architects. And they are making sure that there is a wide pool that James spoke about for practices to delve into when they are fishing for new talent. That has not stopped, COVID or not. They have signed 10 new practices, including some of the largest firms that you will all have heard of, because we have a number on our books. This strand of work has, of course, inclusion and social mobility at its core. And many of you know that inspiration just makes sure that we drive forward this one objective and continue to do so. Now, where what I found out just recently, having gone through a competitive process to fund and to place the RIBA funded young person to work here, a part 2 architect who surprisingly benefited from practically a social value project. who was on one of the projects that we run with a number of architecture firms, which make sure that for an urban engagement environment design projects, they allocate a fund to make sure that young people benefit from a social value project in the area. The one I'm talking about, Alan, certainly you'll know, is the Meridian Water Project. So we've worked with a number of architects to fund an outreach, the understanding outreach opportunities for young people, workshops, community workshops as well, to help with the build and to understand how communities play a part in designing the spaces and the places that they live in. And then they go on to fund for 3 years their architecture practice in order that they qualify. And lo and behold, young Maya, who helped me put together this activity, was a beneficiary of that project, which is absolutely unbelievable. And I'm in my last minute, of course I would be. We have now 400 plus on the alumni. We're about to start another few social value projects, and the beauty of those is that they engage the entire community, but also the young people who need funding and supporting to become architects. We're very proud to be part of this work. It is at the core of what we do. All of a sudden, everyone is waking up to putting into practice what James is talking about and has been publishing and working on for many years. We do that in a practical sense. It's evidence-based. We're a charity, and therefore we have to make sure that we deliver what we say we do. So we bring to life what has been discussed prior to my session here today. So it's lovely to have you all, and I'm going to shut up now because I'm sure I'm in my last bit. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you very much, Sonia. We're halfway through our panel presentations. Just to remind the audience that we have the question and answer function, so please do ask questions. We are now moving on to our third presenter. That's Maryan Al-Irhayim. Maryan, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, my name is Maryan Al-Irhayim. I'm the current architecture student representative at the RIBA, and I'm also an architecture student at Manchester University. In March, when universities and practices were forced to close due to COVID-19, Victoria Lewis and I, who are the current representatives for students and associates, were thinking, how can we best help support students and future architects in this time? We recognized that the journey to becoming an architect and the different transitions have their own challenges. For example, a student entering the profession and starting their exciting career at university may face different issues than someone at the end of their part 3, undergoing work experience and their case study, or even recent graduates looking for jobs in the middle of a pandemic. I think most architects can remember when they were struggling to find a job and how difficult it must be now. However, recognizing the similarities between all these future architects is key. These consist of feelings of uncertainty in navigating the process to becoming a licensed professional. It is clear that having further support, being engaged with others, and feeling comfortable to ask questions, as well as being able to communicate their worries of the uncertain future is key, as well as still having and maintaining confidence in their abilities. Our understanding of these variances informed our paper, COVID-19, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This really highlighted the variety of issues that future architects face in this current time. The good being we commend the resilience of architecture students and university staff making the transition to online learning, as well as now some face-to-face sessions. This year, we also saw physical end-of-year exhibitions make the transition to online space. However, the bad. COVID also highlights the barriers within our profession, making them more apparent. The question becomes, how accessible is our profession? From entry, becoming a licensed professional, as the current standstill within architecture due to COVID-19, with graduates unable to attain jobs, regardless of the talent, with some applicants applying to 50, 100, or even sending over 300 applications. The question becomes, is the system adaptable enough to these circumstances, as most young professionals may feel even more worried if they can even become an architect? The ugly. For example, some students prior to COVID were using university computers to undertake their architectural work. However, due to the pandemic, When universities were closed, having a laptop became not only a piece of hardware, but an access to education. This education barrier has left some students in the dark, unable to undertake the education that they need to complete their tasks. The fact is that the RIBA has over 50 UK schools of architecture, with a total of over 16,600 students, and that was only in 2017 and 18. We think that students should have equal opportunity, ensuring that they can have access to technology to be able to undertake their course. And we also believe that this will widen the profession and increase student engagement, reducing financial strain, difficulty to study. Not all architecture students have the same experience. When I was undertaking the RIBA bursary this year, it became apparent that some students were faced with a difficult decision to choose between buying a piece of wood for their model or buying food to eat. This showcases the hidden costs needed to study architecture. Students usually are able to save up money in their year out. However, now it is no longer plausible. Concluding, really, as students and associate representatives, we recognize these new challenges that future architects now face. We believe that architecture should be for all. However, we still have a long way to go. When we are born in this world, we learn to accept the world as it is. We may be unaware that we can shape it. We accept how we eat, how we communicate. I guess it's that teenage angst or a bit of spice of anarchy questioning the current world. What an architect is today is not going to be the same as tomorrow. COVID-19 really showcased the need to adapt and change. We shouldn't be afraid of change. Architects have the skill set to be more adaptable, but it's also up to future generations of architects to redefine what an architect is. I have faith in my fellow architecture students to have the drive, initiative to change the world. Students who are dedicated, passionate about world issues, from climate change to equality and fire safety, using design as a tool to advocate solutions to real-world issues. The world may be uncertain, but that doesn't mean we should lose hope. With all of us working together, I believe we can get through this. Each person has a role to play. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Maryan. On the button, 5 minutes. So thank you very much indeed. And finally, I remind you folk again, everybody who's listening, the question and answer function. I also should encourage you to vote to help the likes of myself and the co-organisers to choose which questions to ask. Our final presenter is Geoffrey Milton, the HR Director at the RIBA. Geoffrey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alan. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much to the previous speakers for their input here. My challenge now is to update you a little bit on the work we've been doing within the RIBA, and looking at that in two ways, really. First of all is looking at what we're doing internally for our own staff to make sure that we are diverse and inclusive and addressing the social mobility challenge. So one of the first things there that in fact I've been working with Antoinette on is the importance of data. And what we realise is that some of our data on our own employees really is not helping us, and it's a comment that James made, to actually set the benchmark of where we are at the moment, and then help us to look at how we move forward from there. So that's a piece of work that we've started. We've got a 44% return rate from that work, which is a good start, I understand, for our first year. Another area that's been taxing me relates to the search and recruitment of employees and even non-executive and committee members. And that's something that's really important for us to look at how we recruit people from diverse backgrounds. And within that in mind, we've been looking at a variety of different platforms and social media to make sure that we are addressing that gap in terms of the people that are representing RIBA and working with RIBA. So following on from recruitment, one of the other areas that I think of concern is it's interesting to note we only have one apprenticeship actually within the RIBA. I understand that there are something like 65 architectural apprentices. That's a figure that I've been talking to the education team about externally, and it seems to me that we have an opportunity here to be working together, not just from an internal RIBA employee perspective, but how we're supporting membership and the architecture profession at large, and coming together will give us a bigger bite and a larger reach. So one of the things that's interesting to me, and it's not a promise, is things like the government's Kickstart scheme and how we could perhaps combine our internal apprenticeship development with other stakeholders. I think that's rather important. A plug for something that I'm personally involved with is something called the Enterprise Advisor Scheme, which is something that's supported by my professional body, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, which looks at placing experts and people from the workplace into schools and colleges to actually support career-related learning and development. And it's something that I have been personally particularly interested in supporting working class boys in schools who perhaps don't have the opportunity. And at their recent career fair at St Aloys College in North London, we did a big push on the career in architecture. So that leads me on to looking at the profession, which is, I'm describing it as rather as a funnel as to how you go through that potential career development or as you pass through that for architecture. So at the wide end there, you've got school children and young people, and we have our National Schools programme that is a great success in getting people into that, young people into those programs. We have something like over 200 schools that have participated, 500 architect ambassadors, and we have spent something like £220,000 in budget on this, and received something like 500,000, so nearly £500,000 of in-kind benefits for this. The big question around it, though, when I talk to my colleagues in the learning team, is how we make sure that we are really addressing some of the key socioeconomic groups, so postcodes where perhaps some of the least well-off and the most deprived people are actually living, and how do we address that rather than going for the sorts of usual suspects. Moving along, it's interesting to note the foundation and the RIBA Foundation undergraduate programme, and I think that's somewhere where, talking to Lucy Carmichael, we have on the blocks a career progression toolkit that we've not actually launched, but giving advice and support to schools of architecture, colleges, etc. Moving on very quickly, because Alan's telling me I've got 1 minute left. I would like to call out the education team, where we have something like 900 students. We have something like 900 students having spent 1.8 million from 1997 to 2020 on giving them bursaries and support. Again, we need to look at the data and the analysis to make sure this is all going to the right place and that we're making the most of that money. So for the future, I think data, understanding where we are actually spending our money and resource is important. I think that there's great opportunity for further collaboration from us internally in RIBA with external stakeholders. That's it. I shall stop there because I think my time is up.
Geoffrey, thank you very, very much for your presentation. We now will sort of, if you like, sample from the question and answer session. I appreciate some of the best votes have gone for individual speakers, just saying how well they've done. But sort of I think there's one around student debt, and if you like, if what we're talking about is, what would you call it, access to the profession. And it's been pointed out how expensive it is to actually study architecture. There are, particularly after there are various routes through, but still many choose to actually take the, if you like, the traditional fully university-based system. And I just sort of there are examples of blended learning, earning and learning, the London School of Architecture. We have apprenticeships, particularly at Part 2 level, and so on. To invite sort of comment about the, if you like, because it's linked back to the salaries of architects. And I suppose when we have got such an expert like James in the room, to give James an opportunity to sort of reflect on how much architects are earning, the actual the debt, if you like. We don't hear so much about the debt of studying to be a doctor, because it's actually, if you like, financial at the end, reward. But James, and then maybe Maria, I saw your hand up as well. So over to you, James, first of all.
Yeah, yeah, great. Thank you, Alan. Yeah, so the interaction with social mobility and student debt is actually quite complex. So actually, even though we have these very high levels of debt at present, UK youngsters or English youngsters come out with some of the highest levels of debt in the world, we have more disadvantaged young people going to university than ever before. So it's not a straightforward interaction, but I think there are differences between courses and institutions as well. And it may well be that something like architecture, 5-year commitment, lower starting salaries, that does start to shape what a young person does and what they decide to do when they are 18. I mean, I think even if you take out the debt as being an obstacle to taking the course in the first place, just from a social mobility point of view, the idea that we should be loading up low income young people with 40, 50, 60,000 pounds worth of debt is not a good thing for social mobility, even if it's not an access barrier. So at the Trust, we think at least maintenance grants should be reinstated, because that would help to chip away at that debt. And maintenance grants are about your individual circumstances. Can your parents afford to support you? And of course, wealthy 18-year-olds are not independent of their parents. They're still drawing on all the money that those young people can access. So it is an equity issue, but how it works, I think, is quite complicated.
Thank you very much, James. Over to you, Maria.
Thanks. Thank you, Alan. I think what's important is, especially that it was a really good question, because it does talk about the spectrum of access to university or apprentice or the RIBA studio, where you are working from day one. You're working full time from day one and studying on a part-time basis. I think what's important, of course, having the provisions and equity is really important, but it's also really important to know what kind of learner the person is. Are you a person that learns better while in practice? And then there are specific routes. And I think that is a really important starting point to think about. A lot of students don't do well in full-time university because it's just not the way they learn. And so with the RIBA studio and the emerging apprentices programs as well, students are in practice in the RIBA studio. They're in full-time practice and working with the tutor. And they're free to move practice. They're free to live in different cities, and I think that's the real important starting point is having an idea of what kind of learner that person is.
Thank you very much, Maria. One of the questions is also around, if you like, social sort of networks and so on, and how, if you like, parents and contacts within a particular practice can recommend certain people to do internships and so on. I'm just wondering how we break down that sort of, friends of friends and, the employing, and giving opportunities to people who are like us, if you know what I mean. If I went round the panel, what would you suggest would be, if you're like your advice on how to try and break that system? Sonia, you're nodding profusely. What would you suggest?
None of our young people know anyone. They have their network is us. So no one of the numbers I'm giving you and none of the practices that we work with are doing anything other than working with merit and through a meritocratic process. So we are the glue, we are the network that gets them into those practices. So for me, as always, I'll jump straight into, so you don't have to come back to my closing remark, call to action. Look over your shoulder and ask yourselves, why aren't you more diverse? Why isn't it happen? We are already moving beyond inclusion to what it takes to thrive, because inclusion simply means you're allowing me in. I don't need to be allowed in, nor do the young people who are talented. What they need to be given are the tools to thrive. And really that's what we need to do, is continue to challenge that notion that we are doing anyone a favour. This is a pool of talent that needs to be utilised by UK PLC.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Geoffrey, you're on mute at the minute, but you were nodding. Your thoughts on what you think the RIBA could be doing to widen in terms of being anonymous?
Sort of the network thing on this, an old boys network, whatever you want to call it, and being an old boy myself, you know, that I can see how that comes into play, and you can understand it's a natural reaction for people to want to make those connections with people they know. So whether it's pushy parents or other definitions of this, I think from a RIBA perspective, what's clear to me, we have to have much clearer and more rigorous ways of addressing these opportunities, so that we are giving people a wider, so we're giving a wider search to people and stretch our network a bit further. So I think we have to call that out. I think that's what I'm saying, so that it's not, so we're minimizing it. But I think it would be untrue to say that you are not going to have people pushing for that sort of thing. But it's our job to call it out and to have a rigorous approach.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey. James, to ask you to, you know, that you mentioned in your presentation about, if you like, organisations and professions maybe find it difficult in that, if you like, it's more invisible. Social mobility, you know, it's easier, if you like, to address other characteristics, if you know what I mean, that are protected. What would be your sort of, if you like, 3 top tips in terms of addressing this the invisibility of it to ensure maximum opportunity?
Well, I think social mobility does intersect a lot with the other bits of diversity that we're interested in. So I don't think it should be seen in isolation, because these barriers are complex, of course. But I think the point about measurement is really important, because if it is invisible, I think understanding the issue and where the barriers are the first step in addressing it. And for me, it's about pipeline. It's about recruitment, and it's about progression. And I think, you know, it is a very complex situation, but if you can do something in each of those buckets, we'll go a long way to making a difference, I think. Thank
you very much. I'm trying to also read the questions at the same time. I'm trying to moderate. I'm trying to see where we've got to in terms of the votes and so on. Here's a good one, and I will confess to suffering from this from time to time myself. Does the panel have any suggestions on how to combat imposter syndrome that goes often along with being from poorer working class areas in which stages of the profession? So it's that sort of I should not be here type sort of feeling. I wonder how, Sonia, have you ever experienced imposter syndrome, and have you any advice on how to combat it?
So I think look, imposter syndrome it hits many of us at very different points in our existence. I think regardless of our background or where we are or what sort of education we've had, we can often feel as though that we're not. The seat at the table is not one that we should be occupying. So I think there is something there about which a number of the panelists have spoken about exactly that representation does help. If you don't always feel that like you're the only one like you in a room or a space or an environment, that will help to battle what is a challenge for many of us, which is imposter syndrome. Most of us don't feel as fabulous as others say that we might be at times, and we all need that sort of feedback. But for me, normally being the only me in a room, I take the Oprah Winfrey approach, which I always say the crown has been worked for. All I've got to do is put it on my head. So at the end of the day, I think you have to battle it in the same way that we battled the scourge of social mobility. Just keep believing that you are where you should be and that your place is secure and that you've worked for it. And that we need to stop thinking about ourselves in terms of we are being given a space, particularly those from minority or other what we call diverse backgrounds, where you are used to, I'm afraid, being one of the few, not the many. So I think you simply have to find a way to dig up the crown and wear it, and just believe that you should be there, because it is a tough one, and I do suffer from it, in case anyone's asking.
Thank you, Sonia. Maria.
Apologies, I had to find the mic. I just thank you, Sonia. That was really beautiful. And I would also just add to that I'm going to venture a guess that almost everyone on this talk has that feeling. I don't think it ever goes away. I think, you know, being the first to university is very challenging, you know, and I think I love what Sonia said, embrace it. And what I would add is that when you make it about other people, you know, the reason why a lot of us are here today is because we know that feeling and we want to help other people overcome. And it does amazing things for you in your own sense of the imposter syndrome when you are, you know, effective in the world in supporting that and in supporting people who are going to feel that as well. Thank you. Maria,
thank you very much. I'm going to move now to a question from Femi Orasanya. James, what one for you to consider? Femi's question is, how can we get more practices? So how can we get businesses to let their staff go into schools, especially those schools in socially and economically deprived areas, into those schools to promote the profession to pupils from non-traditional backgrounds? What are the motivations for business?
Well, I think there's a pipeline issue. So there's a motivation in terms of actually that paying dividends for your business. But this is also a profession. So the seeds you sow in those school visits will grow into things that maybe other practices will. I'm losing my analogy, but reap in the future. You know. So it's that sort of individual approach plus that societal approach. What I would also say in that work though is that can be really, really powerful, and we have some programs that do that really well. But choosing the right schools is critical. You know, some schools in Tower Hamlets, some schools in London are overwhelmed with organisations going in to try to reach their students, whereas other schools have almost nothing. So the idea that we must spread it around and these opportunities should get to some of the hardest to reach places is really important.
Thank you very much. I see Sonia's hand is up.
This is a real quick one, and again, because you will get the sense that I like to give practical examples. So we, with a number of practices, have produced digital toolkits around how to get into architecture and other professions. The most recent how to get into architecture, accessed digitally by young people and schools across the country over 1,200 times just in the last 4 weeks. So there are other ways to do exactly as James is saying, and getting that spread so that we are trying, and especially now, we all need to understand that the digital space is the one, as difficult as it might be, as Maryan says, that is also the way that we are learning now, and that's tough. By the way, Maryan, my daughter's at Manchester, so I'm going to get her to come and dig you out, look you up. I think that's the other way as well, is that we can really get that breadth, James, by making sure that we take account and utilise the digital space a whole lot more, which we've found to be incredibly successful in recent times during the COVID pandemic as well. But it was still incredibly popular, the Into Architecture Toolkit.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Maria, very quick comment. We've got 2 or 3 minutes left.
Just a practical note that the RIBA have a new CPD that hasn't been published yet, but it was made with Celebrating Architecture and Brookes University, where architects can get a short course in tutoring in schools, and then we help make the link to schools.
Thank you very much, Maria. We have literally 2 or 3 minutes left, and I wanted to give the floor finally to Maryan, our student council representative, as representing future architects. Maryan, your last thoughts for this event.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone tuning in, and I want to encourage you all to continue the conversation with your colleagues, with your friends, and as much as this is just one event, but we all have a role to really start opening up the conversation, especially in architecture. And I also hope that everyone feels empowered to help out other people as well. When I started working with the RIBA, I would say the main thing that really helped me keep on going was really just kind of serving the profession. I think that it's a really unique opportunity that the RIBA has like-minded people who also want to help the profession. They come from different backgrounds, they have their own practices, some of them have PhDs, and they're all giving up their time just to help architecture advance. And I think everybody has a role that they can help, whether it's a student to a student, a practice to a practice, or maybe somebody mentoring someone else. In these hard times, we need to rely on each other and make sure that our profession within architecture are a bunch of really nice people who help out one another. So I hope that we all do that.
Thank you very much, Maryan. I couldn't have put it better myself. I'd like to finish by encouraging us all to, sort of spread the word from what we've been discussing. Remind people that it is recorded and they can listen to it. Continue the conversation as Maryan was asking us to do. I'd like to thank everybody who's listening in the audience and thank our presenters. And please do look. It was mentioned about looking behind and see who's behind us, but also to reach down and pull people up. Thank you very much indeed. And we've got literally seconds. I'm not sure. I don't have a second count on this. Trying to keep to time, but thank you. I'm so pleased that we've here we are talking about social mobility. 2 or 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, we wouldn't have been. So very much thank you and goodbye.